The ocean does not speak, yet it remembers. Every wake that cuts through its surface carries a signature of human intent, the movement of trade, the rhythm of migration, the whisper of power. In October 2025, one such wake vanished in a flash of precision and fire. A suspected drug-running vessel, moving east across the Pacific, did not reach its destination. It was intercepted and destroyed by a U.S. Navy asset, operating under Joint Command Authority. 2 men died. The strike lasted seconds, but its ripples are still spreading across strategy rooms and maritime trade routes. For decades, the United States Navy has trained for high-end war, carrier operations, submarine deterrence, and freedom of navigation patrols. Yet the strike on that small craft, far from any battlefield, represents something different, a mission of hybrid deterrence. It is not a grand clash of fleets, but it is a battle nonetheless, one fought in the shadows between crime and war, finance and force. When the news first broke on October 22, 2025, Reuters described it in a few spare lines. U.S. forces struck a suspected drug vessel in the Eastern Pacific. 2 suspected traffickers were killed. For many readers, it was another short military brief. For analysts and historians, however, it marked an inflection point. The moment when the most powerful navy in history demonstrated that even the smallest targets, when linked to transnational finance and instability, fall within its operational reach. Imagine the scene, the vast emptiness of the Eastern Pacific, morning light burning through mist. The sea stretches thousands of miles with nothing but swells and horizon. A small fast boat, no larger than a fishing trawler, speeds across open water, its hull heavy with illicit cargo worth millions on the black market. Overhead, unseen by human eyes, a Navy P-8 Poseidon aircraft scans the waves with radar and infrared sensors. Coordinates flash across a screen. A destroyer already on station turns to intercept. Within minutes, authorization flows through encrypted networks. Decisions made in the calm of command rooms, thousands of miles away, translate into lethal action on the water's surface. The vessel is engaged. Flames rise. The sea swallows the evidence. For the sailors aboard, it is another mission complete. For policymakers, it is an experiment in using naval power as law enforcement. For your viewer, the curious observer, it's the unfolding of a new doctrine, the blending of maritime warfare, economic enforcement, and global deterrence. Across Washington, the operation is read as both a tactical success and a strategic signal. The Navy is no longer confined to preparing for hypothetical great power conflict. It is now enforcing international order in the gray zone, between peace and war, legality and combat. The Pentagon later confirmed that this strike was part of a wider campaign, the 8th maritime engagement in the Caribbean and Pacific in recent months, targeting vessels tied to trafficking networks that finance instability across the Americas. Each strike follows intelligence trails that lead not just to cartels but to financial conduits, money laundering chains, and even state-linked intermediaries. The message is clear. The sea lanes that feed global commerce can also feed chaos, and the U.S. Navy intends to police them. The hidden network of the sea. For centuries, navies existed to control trade routes. Today, the battle for those routes looks different. Illicit networks move synthetic drugs, weapons, and untraceable cash through maritime corridors, faster than most governments can monitor. A single 20-meter semi-submersible narco sub can carry cargo worth $100 million USD. Multiply that by dozens of voyages each month, and the numbers rival corporate profits. Behind every intercepted vessel lies an invisible spreadsheet: costs, risks, profits. The decision to use a $2 billion destroyer to neutralize a $3 million smuggler's boat seems disproportionate until you consider the financial ecosystem of transnational crime. Trafficking revenues destabilize currencies, inflate black market economies, and underwrite insurgent movements. From Washington's perspective, the strike was not about drugs. It was about economics. The Navy became an instrument of macro stabilization, and this is where finance quietly enters the picture. Each operation must be funded, each missile accounted for, each patrol planned within budgetary cycles measured in billions. The FY 2026 U.S. Navy budget already set aside roughly $47 billion for new ship construction and modernization. That figure, vast as it seems, represents only 1/3 of the Navy's overall operational requirement. Every engagement, even one against a drug runner, consumes part of that finite pool. Fuel costs, logistics chains, surveillance hours, hazard pay. The economics of deterrence mirror the economics of competition. Whoever sustains presence longer wins. The power behind the horizon. To understand why the Navy is acting this way, one must look beyond the immediate incident. In 2025, the maritime domain has become both crowded and contested. Chinese shipyards continue to outproduce Western counterparts. Russian submarines probe Atlantic thresholds. Private maritime militias blur the line between commercial shipping and paramilitary operations. Amid all this, the U.S. Navy has chosen to expand its mission definition. It is no longer just the hammer of foreign policy. It is the guardian of the rules-based order at sea. That means chasing pirates off Somalia, deterring missiles in the Red Sea, and now intercepting drug boats in the Pacific. Each of these acts reinforces the same strategic posture. Control the sea, and you control stability. When the destroyer's engines rumble beneath the decks, thousands of tons of moving metal become the expression of a nation's economy and its ideals. Each sailor aboard represents a taxpayer's investment. Each weapon system, a ledger entry in the defense industrial balance sheet. The Navy's fleet is both a military force and a capital asset, depreciating, upgrading, and revaluing in every fiscal report. To maintain a single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs about $200,000 per day in operations. Over a 90-day deployment, that's nearly $18 million, before accounting for missile expenditure or maintenance downtime. Yet the strategic return on that investment, securing maritime routes that carry 90% of global trade, is incalculable. This is why military strategy and financial logic are no longer separate. A strike at sea is also a line item in a global budget. Every missile fired is not only a tactical event, but an entry on a balance sheet that stretches from shipyards in Mississippi to stock portfolios in New York. The money that builds ships sustains communities, industries, and entire ecosystems of labor. In that sense, the Navy is both warrior and employer, shield and marketplace. The ripple effect. When news of the Pacific strike reached the Caribbean, where U.S. warships were already hunting similar targets, it had a psychological effect. Cartel networks adjusted routes, insurers recalculated risk premiums, and neighboring nations requested intelligence support. That's the unseen power of naval action. It reshapes behavior through perception. At the same time, policymakers in Congress reviewed cost efficiency. Could such high-value assets continue being used for low-intensity missions? Would it be better to develop smaller unmanned vessels for interdiction? These questions are not merely bureaucratic. They define the future of naval architecture. If the Navy must police both major wars and maritime crime, it needs platforms flexible enough to do both. That logic is already shaping shipbuilding contracts worth billions. Analysts note that while the immediate purpose of these operations is enforcement, the deeper function is experimentation. Each deployment becomes a data-gathering mission, testing command and control systems, interoperability with Coast Guard and allied navies, drone integration, and real-time intelligence fusion. In short, a strike on a smuggler's boat doubles as a live exercise in 21st century naval warfare. The public rarely sees this side. What they witness is a brief headline. What happens behind it is an evolving doctrine that merges combat, law enforcement, and finance into one seamless continuum. From shadows to strategy inside the Pentagon's E-ring, planners discuss these events in calm, abstract terms. They talk of maritime domain awareness, low-intensity interdiction, and hybrid deterrence. Yet behind every phrase lies human action. Sailors navigating storms, analysts decoding signals, engineers maintaining machines that must never fail. The Navy operates across 70% of the planet's surface, and every decision at sea carries both cost and consequence. The October 22nd strike will likely be remembered, not for its scale, but for its symbolism. It showed that the world's most advanced Navy can pivot instantly, from preparing for conflict with peer adversaries to conducting pinpoint enforcement operations. It proved flexibility, reach, and resolve, and perhaps most significantly, it revealed how modern power expresses itself, not just through wars won or lost, but through transactions prevented. A ship stopped before it could fund violence elsewhere. A network disrupted before it could corrupt markets. How signals sent that the sea has watchers. The ocean remains vast, unpredictable, and indifferent. But beneath that indifference now moves a fleet renewed in purpose, one that views every horizon not just as a boundary, but as a balance sheet of stability. For the men and women who serve, the mission is clear: to keep the world's waters safe, profitable, and free. The ocean's expanse is a stage for more than just ship movements. It is a theater of strategic escalation, calibrated presence, and silent messaging. In the latter half of 2025, the United States Navy moved not merely in response to traditional threats, but into new territories of influence: the Caribbean Sea, Eastern Pacific corridors, and coastal waters near South America. The surge began not with fanfare but with motion: guided missile destroyers, amphibious ready groups, littoral combat ships repositioned. Between August and September, warships such as USS San Antonio, USS Iwo Jima, and USS Fort Lauderdale steamed into the southern Caribbean, deploying Marines, helicopters, and support craft. These deployments weren't routine. Analysts described the buildup as the largest U.S. naval concentration in the region since the 1960s. The scale signaled intent. The Navy was shifting from presence to posture, from deterrence to enforcement. The Caribbean had become an arena of maritime competition, not just a corridor for trade. The U.S. military's definition of the sea changed. The waves now held not only ships of state, but transnational networks of illicit trade, undocumented finance flows, and fluid transits that defied borders. In September and October, the count of confirmed U.S. strikes on vessels that authorities associated with drug traffickers reached 7 in Caribbean waters, with additional operations in the Eastern Pacific. Each strike amplified the strategic message: vessels, even small ones, can no longer move with impunity in those seas. Yet each strike also raised legal and diplomatic concerns. A group of independent experts with the United Nations argued that some operations risked violating international law, equivalent to extrajudicial killing when conducted in international waters without transparent judicial oversight. From the decks of destroyers to the command rooms of Washington, the operational tempo accelerated. These ships did not simply transit, they executed. They patrolled maritime corridors, launched surveillance aircraft, intercepted suspect craft. The destroyer changed from a ceremonial symbol of power to an active tool of maritime law enforcement. In one case, survivors were taken from a struck vessel and held aboard a U.S. warship, raising broader questions about status, custody, and the laws of armed conflict. Around the naval deployment, the region stirred. The government of Venezuela denounced the presence of U.S. warships as an act of aggression, suggesting that Washington's campaign went beyond trafficking and edged toward regime change. Meanwhile, allies and regional partners watched closely. This was not simply a military show of force. It was a message to networks, to states, to commerce itself. Strategic layering of presence. The pattern is deliberate. First arrive. Reposition forces in advance, then scan and surveil. Maritime patrol aircraft, drones, ships working in concert. Finally intervene. Strikes, seizures, interdict. Each phase reinforces the next. For the Navy, the sea lanes that link South America to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean have long been conduits for trade. Today they are being treated as conduits for influence too. The amphibious vessels brought Marines. The destroyers brought missiles and sensors. The littoral ships brought agility. Together they formed a layered architecture: detection, deterrence, interdiction. These assets enabled faster decision cycles, from intelligence to action. The small boat that sank in the Eastern Pacific on October 22nd did not lack speed or cunning. It lacked strategic depth and an adversary who timed their strike precisely. Logistics and readiness at scale. Deploying warships into such roles is a massive logistical enterprise. Fuel stores, missile inventories, ammunition magazines, spare parts, maintenance rotors. The list is long. The Navy must keep engines humming, radar sweeping, sonar listening. In the Caribbean deployment, the sheer number of ships required forward staging, allied cooperation, port visits, and sustainment planning. The cost is not trivial. Every day, a destroyer spends on station adds maintenance cycles and wear. Every missile expended or sensor upgraded adds to the budget sheet. Moreover, the industrial base behind these operations is vital. Shipyards in the US produce hulls and weapon systems. Suppliers deliver radar suites, propulsion gear and electronics. Maintenance facilities repair and refit. The crescendo of deployment places strain on these systems and drives cost. And those costs eventually connect to the public ledger. Budgets, appropriations, industrial contracts. Even a mission against a small craft has an economic footprint measured in millions, sometimes tens of millions, when you consider the whole chain from ship to strike. The diplomatic and financial undercurrent. As the Navy pushes into these new missions, finance plays quietly in the background. Deployments cost money. Procurement drives jobs. Contracts drive industrial growth. The Caribbean deployment is not just a naval story, it is an investment in strategic infrastructure. When Congress reviews maritime budgets, these deployments show up as bullet points for maritime security operations, fleet presence, or counter-illicit operations. The Navy's presence becomes an expenditure, yes, but also an asset, projecting deterrence, securing routes, enabling partner cooperation. As ships like USS Jason Dunham and others moved into the region, they didn't just bring warships, they brought a message to the capital markets, to allied navies and to adversaries. The US is serious about maritime enforcement. Investors in defense firms note that such missions drive demand for sensors, unmanned systems, hulls and support services. The ripple to the economy, though unseen by most, exists. The risk of overstretch. Yet with expansion comes risk. The same forces that allow the Navy to act in multiple theaters must be balanced against sustained readiness. If the fleet is used simultaneously for high-end warfighting, humanitarian assistance, counter-trafficking and presence operations, resources are diluted. Ships wear out, crews fatigue, maintenance lags. The complexity of this deployment demands that the Navy walk a fine line, showing presence without overcommitting, acting decisively without dragging into protracted engagement. For the viewer, it is instructive. The oceans are no longer passive highways. They are contested zones where ships, finance, law and diplomacy converge. The Caribbean deployment, the Eastern Pacific strike, the series of 8 strikes. They are chapters in a larger narrative of maritime power redesigned. As part 2 of our story closes, we see the deployment in motion, ships steaming, Marines embarked, radars active, missiles ready. The game is not merely about adversaries at sea. It is about influence, money routed through waves, and the cost of maintaining a global presence.